Lebanon. The most important target and priority number one is the Iranian nuclear program. This is priority number one. We cannot afford allowing any Islamic entity to have mass destruction weapon. Priority number one. We cannot afford allowing any Islamic entity to have mass destruction weapon because they are not showing responsibility. They have been bullying, they have been intimidating other religions and ethnic groups. The Islamic hatred against the Jewish people is evident. And of course, many people can hide behind the Palestine as a device to express their anti-Semitism, to inflict pain on the Jewish people after they suffered a genocide on October 7, which, by the way, by the definition, the only genocide was committed is on October 7. What's happening in Gaza is not a genocide, it's collateral damage. It's the use of human shields that has been justified by Omar and many advocates on behalf of Palestine who think that the use of human shields and kidnapping people and raping and looting and the calls for annihilating of the human race is a form of resistance.
Baseless. I've never
this is their, you things. Shut up. You shut up, it's my turn now.
Yeah,
so now,
by all means,
the thing is, they invert the narrative. They invert the narrative. Every time they suffer a defeat, they call it a genocide. And we say, no, there is a big difference between defeat and a genocide. You started this war and you killed Jewish people on October 7 by the name of Allah, not by the name of Palestine. Then the entire Muslim world backed Hamas in a global offensive against the Jewish people, a small minority that is resilient to time, with overwhelming evidence in relationship to the land, the only indigenous people to the land who did not oppose allowing the Arabs to stay in the state of Israel. This is why we have 2 million Arabs in Israel. So now, to accuse Israel of ethnic cleansing, to accuse Israel of genocide, while you are the perpetrator. You are the perpetrator. Why are you interrupting me? I listened to your false narrative all the way until the end.
No.
So this is the time to sit down and listen.
Carry on.
Sit down and listen.
Carry on with your nonsense.
This is your mastery, inverting the narrative. This is what you do best. You are the perpetrator, then suddenly you become the victim. And I tell you something. Iran will be punished. Everyone who's standing behind terrorism, Hamas is a terrorist organization designated as a terrorist organization in the United States. You cannot be American and supportive of Hamas. You say you are not a big fan of Hamas, but you are a big fan of Hassan Nasrallah. Hassan Nasrallah killed many Americans, hundreds of Americans. Hassan Nasrallah is a criminal. Ayatollah is a criminal. And whether you come by the name of Allah or by the name of religion, it doesn't matter. Justice must be delivered. What happened on October 7, it's not about how many Jews were killed. We cannot agree to that. Nobody in the free world would agree on Hamas aggression that was documented by their own cameras. Of course, we will have to go after them. Otherwise, if I to listen to you, earth will be corrupted. If I to just follow your logic that the war started before in 1948, the war started 1400 years ago.
Africa had never had the right to exist, and Israel never had the right to exist. The only existence...
So it has no right to defend itself against rocket attacks?
But it has no right to exist when it came into being by displacing people and massacring... I understand
your position on its existence. I'm just telling you, given it does exist, does it have no right to defend itself?
This is what you fail to comprehend. As long as you have a master race, as long as you have a hierarchy of race, as long as you have one race that considers itself superior to others, there is not going to be any peace. That's just a fact of life. Whether it's in the United States or whether it's in Palestine or whether it's in South Africa, there's not going to be peace.
And that's the thing. The reason
but you're
why
seriously
this is really
suggesting that Israel should not have responded.
Israel insists.
But you're seriously suggesting that Israel should not have responded to one of the worst terror attacks in history in any military way whatsoever.
You have to be consistent about this, Piers. If we're expecting Palestinians to not respond in any militant sense to literally decades of Israeli atrocities and war crimes against Palestinians, why does it only work one way? Why do we say that Israel must respond militarily, but Palestinians are never said to need to respond militarily to decades of Israeli occupation and war crimes? Why is that double standard there?
Because the argument, as you know, from the other side is if you go back to 1948, that there have been a series of escalations in those 75 years with blame being attached to both sides, small things happening, which then trigger outbreaks of war. And it's gone on now for 75 years. And at the centre of it is an ongoing... but here's my point. The centre of it is an ongoing dispute about territory and land. I get all that. But ultimately, you cannot have a situation where on one day that volume of people are massacred and wounded, 7,000 people wounded, and that Israel just does nothing. It was so far and away beyond anything anyone had seen in that conflict for 75 years in one day. Of course they were going to respond. Of course Hamas knew. Of course Hamas knew that would be what Israel would do. So they knew what would happen to their own people, and they didn't care. Iran knew what the response would be, and obviously knew what Hamas were going to do. Hezbollah's reaction was not to show a modicum of sympathy for any of the people killed. It was to launch a barrage of rockets in sympathy with Hamas, the terrorists who perpetrated it. And they've carried on doing that for a whole year, and they've displaced 65, 70,000 Israelis from the north of Israel. And at some point, of course, Israel is going to respond. Now, carried on doing that for a whole year, and they've displaced 65, 70,000 Israelis from the north of Israel. And at some point, of course, Israel is going to respond. Now, what part of what I've just said is factually inaccurate?